This podcast is brought to you on Roku and Fire TV by Pod Nation Podcast TV. Find us on X, Facebook, Instagram, or wherever podcasts are broadcast. Download our app and never miss a show with video on demand, as well as exclusive content found only on Pod Nation TV. Live from North Korea, it's the Monster Island Film Vault, episode 94, Pulgasari versus Tomi Trembath. Hello, Kaiju Lovers, and welcome to the Monster Island Film Vault, a podcast seeking entertainment and enlightenment through tokusatsu. I am your host, Monster Island's traveling film curator, Nate Marchand. Yes, Jimmy, I'm a little nervous being here, and I've already had one run-in with the local authorities, and you keep an eye on what they're doing in case they decide to, I don't know, break in. You got good security on this mecha, right? Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. But joining me today, because the show must go on, as Queen told us, is none other than the host of Giant Size Violence and the author of the upcoming comic When We Transform, Tomi Trembath.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Nathan.
Yes. And one thing I should have mentioned is that you're remoting in because nobody wants to go to North Korea if they can avoid it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming you're on a dial-up connection right now, so I'm just kind of shocked this can handle a video call at all.
Well, this is why I'm glad that Jimmy made sure to install Wi-Fi on this mecha. Because I'm not sure the internet reaches to North Korea. There's a whole lot of nothing. Like, you look at North Korea, like the Korean Peninsula on Google Maps, you'll see lots of lights on the south and a lot of nothing in the north.
I think I've heard of like different video game servers. Like, there'll be one ping from North Korea, and they're like, "Is this Kim Jong's Counter-Strike profile?"
well, it'd be Kim Jong-un right now. I don't know if Kim Jong-un likes, anything. I mean, the man outlawed sarcasm. I found this out the hard way.
Well, we do know he likes kaiju movies, but we'll let you get into that.
Well, no, that's Kim Jong-il, his dad. I don't know about...
Oh.
Kim Jong-un is his son. I don't know if he likes... I don't know what he likes, if he likes anything. But yeah, we'll be getting into that a little bit because of today's subject, which is the notorious, probably the most infamous, some might even say controversial kaiju movies ever made. At least that's what ADV wanted to tell everybody when they released this on VHS in the early 2000s. It literally said banned in America. Okay, guys.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a real strong authority on getting after those banned kaiju movies that have no questionable content in and of themselves.
Yeah. I mean, funny enough, I've actually read in a few sources, I haven't been able to confirm how this works, but apparently Pulgasari in the United States is basically treated as if it's in public domain.
Yeah, I mean, I did watch it on YouTube, so that checks out.
Yeah, and I think the version that's on YouTube is actually dubbed in Japanese and subtitled in English.
Okay, that makes sense. I didn't know if maybe it just had really bad ADR throughout. I mean, it's a North Korean movie, so I have some experiencing movies from questionable markets that just have horrible ADR throughout. Mm-hmm. But yeah. That was the Japanese release, which
we'll get into a little bit in the entertaining info dump here in a few minutes. But also today we will be discussing what might be more interesting than the movie itself. I know I'm telegraphing a little bit there, but we will be discussing the many kidnappings perpetrated by North Korea. They still deny it to this day, which is hilarious. But the North Korean abductions and the story of director Shin Sang-ok and his actress wife Choi Eun-hee, who were kidnapped by North Korea and forced to make movies for dear leader. And the reason I'm having you here with me, Tommy, is another part of the crazy story that we'll get into. You grew up with the American remake of this movie.
Yeah, my mom knew I loved kaiju movies, or at least Godzilla. Saw some straight-to-video thing with the giant monster on it, and they're like, the kid will like this, and they were more or less correct. Not enough to make me keep renting it, but I remember it, like, and seemingly no one else does.
Yeah, well, I heard of it. Yeah, we're speaking of specifically of the Adventures of Galgameth, which was made by Shin Sang-ok in the mid-90s. That's just wild to me, but like I said, we'll get into it. And because you're a trooper, you watched both Pulgasari and Galgameth in preparation for this.
Yep, yeah, I had to compare them, and also just I figured watching Pulgasari that, like, okay, I can't wait to see like what this person does with an American studio. Surely it's got to be like a much better movie, but low-key, I think I enjoyed Pulgasari a bit better.
Yeah, and a lot of people have said similar things. Which we'll get into. I don't want to necessarily start things right here because we got to do that entertaining info dump, which is still written into my contract that I have to read, despite the fact that it's my intrepid producer who writes it. So let's get that out of the way, shall we? Pulgasari is an obedient but ravenous construct creature sculpted by an imprisoned blacksmith and brought to life by the blood of his daughter. It is postulated that he may house the vengeful spirit of the blacksmith. While he usually defers to the daughter and is perceived as a savior by oppressed peasants, he is apathetic to their plight and is motivated only to feed on more iron by any means necessary, seeing their fight against the king as a means to that end. The blacksmith's compassionate and self-sacrificial daughter, Ami, uses her blood bond with Pulgasari to direct him to fight the peasants' oppressors. When Pulgasari turns on Ami's people after the defeat of the king, she allows herself to be eaten by the monster to inexplicably destroy him to prevent Korea from going to war with the world to satiate his voracious appetite for iron. Her would-be husband, Inde, is a heroic and defiant rebel leader leading the peasants against the king's forces. Twice he is captured by his enemies, and the second time he is hanged, his martyrdom galvanizing the rebels, and most especially Ami's, resolve to defeat the king. The loyal and cruel governor spearheads the battles against the rebels in Pulgasari, concocting often outrageous countermeasures against the monster. This is in service to the king, a tyrannical and oppressive ruler only interested in solidifying his power by any means necessary. While the human plotline begins first, it is unified with the kaiju plotline once Pulgasari is created. The characters and monsters' motives and actions are intertwined, forcing them to act and react accordingly. While the governor and the king are the human villains, the true problem is Pulgasari. The monster fights soldiers while human-sized, eating their weapons before they retreat. He later grows giant and battles the governor's army several times, completely immune to their swords, arrows, spears, and quote-unquote rockets, which he eats. The governor captures Ami to coerce Pulgasari into entering a wooden cage, which is then set on fire. But Pulgasari survives, driving the soldiers into a lake, which he boils with his red-hot body, killing them. Next, the governor enlists a priestess to exorcise the blacksmith's ghost from Pulgasari, and she performs a ritual while the monster walks through a canyon. This paralyzes him long enough for soldiers to cause an avalanche and bury Pulgasari, seemingly killing him. During the battle at the king's castle, enemy forces unleash two massive cannons called the Lion Gun and General Gun on Pulgasari, but he survives the attacks, kills the governor and king, and eventually eats the cannons. The problem is solved when Ami rings a large iron bell to attract Pulgasari's attention, hides inside it, and Pulgasari eats it with her inside. He then petrifies and explodes, reverting to his infant stage. He then turns to energy and enters Ami's body. Whether she died or survived is unclear. While the script by Kim Se-ryun has several subplots for different characters, it's still a simple fantasy adventure story, although some story elements, such as how Ami's sacrifice defeats Pulgasari, go unexplained. While the special effects were directed by Toshiro Nakano, they are hampered by the film's low budget and the crew's inexperience. The movie looks like a grungy 1960s Japanese film like Daimajin, and less like a mid-80s kaiju epic. That being said, at a budget of 15,800 won, it was North Korea's most expensive and ambitious film to date. Nakano's experience with and penchant for pyrotechnics adds a surprising level of spectacle, and, aside from some obviously plastic pecs, the Pulgasari suit rivals most kaiju costumes of the day. But the movie's production values are most obvious in the epic battle scenes, which have hundreds, if not more, extras running around. The downside is these were unpaid conscripted actors. It's also obvious the safety precautions were taken in many scenes depicting actual human suffering. All these make the movie a bit of a mixed bag, but an impressive one nonetheless. This is a dark, self-serious movie despite having some melodramatic acting and often silly moments, which might make it unintentionally funny for some viewers, thereby undermining its attempts at heavy gravitas. With its supernatural monster, mysticism, and folkloric origins, this is a fantasy film. As a North Korean film, this is experimental in that nothing like it had been attempted in that country before. Period pieces had been made, but not a kaiju film, let alone something this ambitious. However, in the kaiju genre as a whole, it's comparatively less experimental. In that regard, it reinforces the style of the Daimajin trilogy with its time period, story, and characters, although this is set in feudal Korea, not feudal Japan. It could also be argued it reinforces the style of the lost 1962 South Korean film Pulgasari because it is based on the same legend. That being said, there are few kaiju films set in the feudal era, which does make it unique. North Korean dictator/cinephile Kim Jong-il wanted this movie to be Korea's Godzilla and make North Korean cinema a worldwide sensation. He intended to merchandise the movie and its monster. He also wanted it to glorify the regime and indoctrinate North Korean citizens. To that end, it was meant to entertain and quote-unquote brainwash North Korean audiences, but also entertain foreign general audiences and, presumably, kaiju fans. While box office numbers are unavailable, it was director Shin Sang-ok's most successful film in North Korea when released in 1985. However, it never saw release outside of its native country until July 4th, 1998, when it was shown in Japan, achieving surprising success thanks to its Japanese crew and tokusatsu techniques. But it was a flop when released July 22, 2000 in South Korea. It was released on VHS in the United States in 2001 by ADV Films. It's viewed as a mixed bag by kaiju fans, who watch it more for its infamy and wild making-of story than its own artistic merits. According to Paul Fisher, Shin Sang-ok's director credit was removed on orders from Kim and later prints of the movie after he and his wife escaped during its theatrical run. It was later dubbed into Japanese in 1998, which is a print that's commonly available online. There are some forces at play. Freedom and tyranny frequently clash as the king and governor oppress the peasants and try to quash their rebellion. The villains even resort to supernatural dominance over the spiritual world by employing an exorcist to stop Pulgasari. Pulgasari's hunger and the people's need for iron are often in conflict, especially after defeating the tyrants. Ami and Inde's love is constantly put aside for the sake of defeating the tyrants, implying it is the greater good. A technology versus the supernatural theme could be read into the villain's use of advanced weaponry against Pulgasari, which can be extrapolated from the contrast between the protagonist's faith in Pulgasari and the villain's self-reliance. There are several themes, both explicit and implicit, in this movie. Tyranny is vilified. Freedom is to be sought at all costs, including one's life. Ami's love and self-sacrifice are presented as positives. The villain's reliance on themselves and technology brings about their downfall. The peasant's faith in Pulgasari is rewarded at first. Pulgasari's gluttony is frowned upon because it could lead to a world war to satisfy him. While Shin Sang-ok denies there is any ideology in it, the movie can be interpreted as a subversive jab at North Korea's communist regime, as seen in the villains and most especially in the traitorous Pulgasari, who becomes a greater tyrant after supposedly saving the people. With my contractual obligations fulfilled, let's finish the Toku Talk and get out of this country faster than the Flash on a sugar rush. All right, Tommy. This was my second viewing of Pulgasari. Was it your first?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like I'd heard of it, but yeah, never until now had a reason to just sink time into the North Korean Godzilla knockoff, but surprisingly, I'm kind of glad I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, admittedly, as I telegraphed in the first segment, I do think the story around it is more interesting than the movie itself, which, I'm going to be honest with you, I've been in the Korean Peninsula for a couple of months looking at all these Korean kaiju movies because there are a lot more than I thought there were. I could have done a whole season just on Korean kaiju movies. And until you get to the host, the story around them is more interesting than the movies. You know, whether it's a Japanese American a Japanese Korean co-production like the original Yongari, the crazily ambitious Reptilian, which was made by a guy who ended up making the most expensive Korean movie ever, and you're hoping to make it an international hit and bring Korean culture to the world, and didn't know what he was doing, to War of the God Monsters that literally stole all of its monster footage from Ultraman. Just took out all the Ultra heroes.
Yeah, I've been getting on you lately to read the series Kaiju Max by Xander Cannon, just because it is chock full of like very in-depth, deep-cut kaiju movie references, Toku references. But I think it's around the 5th volume that it starts to veer into like a lot of Korean kaiju.
Oh,
and whenever you get around to it, I'm going to be picking your brain. I'm like, okay, all of these references went over my head, but every other book, I pretty much got this.
Okay, that'll be interesting. I'll definitely get on that. And if you don't remind me, I'm sure Jimmy will. Sure, keep me accountable. All right. So there's all of that. This is based on a Korean folk tale. I don't know if you knew this. Some Korean folklore or mythology, actually, would be a better way to put it.
Yeah, I was figuring that just since the way they talked about Pulgasari seemed like people knew what it was, and I thought I saw that there was like an existing legend and even like a lost South Korean like maybe silent film or black and white film before this.
It was from the 60s, and it was not silent, but it was black and white, and yes, it is lost, but it was based on Pulgasari. So this is a story that's in both of the peninsulas, and I, having not seen Pulgasari, because you can't, I think from what I've heard of it, I think that one might adhere to the original legends a little more closely, but I've also read that it did factor at least a little bit into the creation of the original Yongari from 1967, if only the name. But just to offer a little bit of a contrast, because Pulgasari in this looks like a bull, basically a minotaur. Or as my friend the Omni viewer put it, he says he looks like the obese love child of a minotaur and an alligator. Which I think is pretty hilarious. But in the original legend, according to descriptions, Pulgasari was a mixture of different animals, which included a bear, an elephant, a rhino, a tiger, and a bull. And it sounds like it was more like a chimera because they were in like different body parts were from different animals. But according to Wikipedia, this is what it tells me. It's like this is the shortened version of the legend. Quote, the Pulgasari is a bloodthirsty beast that grows in size the more metal it eats. According to mythology, it was created by a Buddhist monk who was on the run from the law because Buddhism was illegal in Goryeo era. My apologies if I butchered that. Korea. He created a small figurine out of rice grains and fed it needles, and it began to grow. Soon enough, it was massive, and the government sent soldiers to kill it with arrows and swords, but it simply ate the metal weapons and grew in power. Finally, they decided to kill it with fire, but this had no effect on it, and the Pulgasari carried the fire to burn down a local village. Myths differ on the fate of the Pulgasari. Some say it still lives to this day, while others say it was defeated by monks. End quote.
Well, I assume that they did like maybe a Pokemon thing or possibly Digimon because there's a constant evolution here. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I assume some other monks made some maybe friendlier Pulgasari-like creatures, fed them some metal, and yeah,
That sounds like
the
that definitely sounds like the solution, but I don't know.
yeah. If there's one thing I know about fighting kaiju, it's that you need another kaiju.
You need another kaiju, yeah, yeah. But hearing that paragraph, you can see a lot of that legend is in this movie. You know, the needles feeding on metal, sculpting it out of rice, killing it with fire. You know, like, a lot of that is here.
And to its credit, Pulgasari does kind of change what it looks like a bit as it grows through the movie. Like it's got kind of a Minya looking dinosaur vibe when it's little, but
which is very appropriate because the baby Pulgasari was played by the same guy as Minya, Little Man Machin.
Did they kidnap Minya?
I'll get it. Okay, you want to hear about that part? Okay. I'll get into that part because it kind of factors into the Toku topic, but I'll bring it up here. I had heard for years that that all of the Japanese crew, the Toho crew, who worked on this movie, were themselves kind of benevolently kidnapped. The story I had heard was that Kenpachiro Satsuma, who played adult Pulgasari in this. So, for those who may not know, he was Godzilla for the Heisei series, and he previously in the Showa movies played both Gigan and Hedorah. And he's unfortunately no longer with us. He died within the last year. I'm glad I was able to cover at least one of his movies before his passing. This was my third one with him. And, it was him and Teruyoshi Nakano who did the special effects for 70s and 80s Toho, the genre pictures. I had heard that they were promoting Return of Godzilla, which had just come out in Beijing. They got on a plane. They thought it was going to go back to Japan. It instead went to North Korea, and they were told, hey, we want you to make a kaiju movie for us. That was the story I heard. Apparently, that's not exactly what happened. What actually happened, let me scroll down to that in my notes here. Because I read an interview with Satsuma where he talked about this. He also wrote a whole book about it.
Yeah, like I'm glad to hear it because like knowing that story and watching this film, I'm like, I want to know the story of this movie and see it in film more than like Argo. Like if anything is deserving of an Oscar-worthy film,
yeah,
it's this one.
Oh, yeah, and which we will get. I'm gonna talk about that a little bit here. But according to the interview, what actually happened was he was contacted by a producer, Satsuma says, to be in a movie, but he thought it was going to be shot in America. And then at the last minute, before departure, so I'm guessing he's at the airport getting ready to leave, he finds out, oh, wait, no, it's actually going to be in North Korea, and he's going to do suit work, which disappointed him a little bit because he wanted to be a face actor. He was really hankering to be a face actor at the time. So I'm guessing that maybe that part of the story kind of got exaggerated a little bit and blown a little out of proportion. But according to him, he did go to Beijing first and filmed the end of the movie there. And it was at the Beijing Dian Ying studio. The suit itself was made by Toho staff, and he said that there were 15 Toho staff members who went to Korea and worked on this thing, which is more than I originally thought.
I feel like this guy was in a Russian doll of oppression. Like, not only did he not get to go to America, he had to go to North Korea, and then like he didn't get to be a free face actor. Now he's stuffed into a giant rubber suit. Like, that's insult to injury.
Yeah. And and this is something I picked up watching it again, actually, in preparation for this. But he actually says when they went to North Korea, a lot of the scenes that he was doing were actually filmed on a hill behind the studio where they were working, which actually I noticed that because that is definitely natural sky and not a set. And I am a big fan if people are willing to film tokusatsu suitmation scenes with natural sky. I really like it. Yeah. And basically, they were originally brought on to be advisors. But once they saw how inexperienced and incompetent this North Korean film crew was, they decided, screw it, we'll do it ourselves. Because they tried to explain to him how to do it. And from what I hear, that was the only real problem that they had. They were actually treated very well by Kim Jong-il and the North Koreans, because they put them up in a mansion and, where they stayed for the majority of the 2 months that they were there. And, they were treated very nicely. They just said the biggest problem was that this film crew didn't know what they were doing. Mm-hmm. Yep. And
this is like the ideal situation of Tropic Thunder, only they actually got to see.
It is kind of Tropic Thunder-ish. I could see that working actually with this story. Yeah. I'm a dude pretended to be a dude. I know I might be like, I'm a dude pretended to be a dude pretended to be a kaiju. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna meme that. Now here's the funny thing. He was supposed to go back to North Korea to film one more scene. There was one scene that they didn't get to while he was there. And he ended up not going. And he says another guy had to do it. And he said the other guy was terrible. When he saw the movie. He's not sure why he didn't get to go back. He's thinking it's because his fee was too high.
I want to know which scene this was that had the.
It was the scene when Pulgasari. I don't think he was giant yet. It was when he was leading people into battle.
Oh, okay. So that was my favorite one. Especially when the female protagonist sees him in the woods and just runs up to him and grabs him by the hand and is leading to the village. I chose the bear, everyone.
Except I think the bear is scared of this guy.
If I learned anything from this movie, this is why you should always choose the bear.
Especially if it's a minotaur that eats metal. Yeah. But here's the part that was crazy. When I was watching it, I was thinking to myself, this does seem to have a lot of production value. There's a lot of extras. It's working really hard to look like a big movie. Those extras were conscripted, according to Satsuma. The military would go off and grab random civilians and make them extras for free.
Oh, that sucks. Yeah. The answer was slavery. Don't love that.
I've also heard that supposedly they did not take as many safety precautions as they should have. So there's actual human suffering on film in this.
Well, yeah, it's filmed in North Korea, Nathan. Of course.
I've just said that I've heard that. But it is North Korea. Now, according to Satsuma, he thinks it cost about 200 to 300 million yen, which would have been about $2 or $3 million at the time. And it was intended to be this big international hit.
I can see some aspects of the production working out. This was a way better film than I expected, but this was a film made in 1986, and I don't know if they were just trying to be really true to the original Lost film, because it still looks like something that was made in the 60s.
Yep, that's because North Korea doesn't has really out of date resources for making films. That's why, it was made in the mid 80s, but it looks like a poorly preserved 60s movie.
They couldn't kidnap some cameras?
I don't think it's cameras, it's the film stock. I think is what it was. That, or maybe nobody has bothered to do a 4K restoration on this. Why you would want to do 4K restoration?
I think the less quality of image we get on this, probably the better.
Possibly. But a few other things that I got from that interview. He says he didn't meet Shin very often while they were making the movie because they were largely doing the special effects stuff on their own, which is common practice in Japanese tokusatsu filmmaking. But he said that Shin was kind and peaceful. He was just really busy, so he was just not around a lot. And he said that he heard Kim Jong-il would visit the set because, interestingly, I don't know if you saw this in the YouTube version or not, he's credited as a producer. But every movie made in North Korea would have Dear Leader listed as a producer. Kim Jong-il was actually a movie buff and a huge Godzilla fan. The one redeeming quality he had.
The opening credits were all like listed in Korean, but I will say, because like I didn't want to skip too far ahead, we just upped the speed on the playback to like 1.25, and the score really awesome at an increased speed. Like someone's got to do some kind of like EDM dubstep remix of this thing.
Of the anachronistic 80s synthesizer soundtrack that makes no sense. Who thought? Is it just because it was the 80s? But because somebody thought, you know what feudal Korea needs as its soundtrack? Synthesizer. Okay.
Synthesized joy.
I just okay. I mean, Queen did a couple of fantasy movie soundtracks in the 80s, so why not? You know?
Yeah.
But at least those were Flash Gordon and Highlander. But
yeah. Good things came from those.
Yeah, at least
I'm pretty sure no one was kidnapped for either of them.
No, not like that anyway. Now, here's the funny thing. This just cracks me up. Satsuma says that he's actually gotten a lot of good comments from both Japan and America about this movie. He even says people like it more than Godzilla 98. And here's an illustration of it. He says he went, because this was brought over, as Jimmy laid out in the entertaining info dump, this was brought over to Japan in 1998. And, so 13 years later, after it was released in Korea. And he says it played at what was called the Kineteka Omori Theater in Tokyo. The theater next door was showing Godzilla 98. And he said way more people went to go see Pulgasari.
Dang. Wow. Like, wow, way impressive that North Korea did a better job cashing in on Godzilla than the US did. Wow.
Yeah, go figure on that. Now, unfortunately, someone saw that. I was like, someone saw it. I was like, hey, you know what? Let's release that in South Korea. Nobody saw it. Got released in South Korea. A couple years later, 500 people went to go see it the entire time.
Gosh, but like, as far as comparing it to like the American Godzilla or just like its acclaim in both places, like this is a really solid kaiju movie, or like everything about a kaiju movie I'm looking for is done very well and in a setting I haven't seen before. Really, like the movie's main faults are like everything that isn't a kaiju movie. Like I thought it was super weird the way the movie opens, and like we're introduced to the fact there are rebels before we have any idea there's like an oppressive regime. Like there's just some weird basic story structure stuff that I'm like, I don't know if this is just me bringing a Western mind to this, but I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that like they didn't really think out the plot and pacing of this all that well.
I'm not convinced of that either. I do think it's got some story issues. I found myself having less of an issue with it this time around compared to the first one, but there is one thing I can't get out of my head watching this. And it's interesting that you said that it looks like a 60s movie. There is an entire trilogy of 60s Japanese movies that this reminds me of so much. Have you ever seen Daimajin?
Is that the one with the giant stone golem thing?
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, as you were describing the legend of Pulgasari, like, I'm surprised that legend seems to kind of transcend different cultures, because like there's like the Hebrew golem legends. There's that guy in like Japanese film. I don't know if that dates back to earlier legends or not. But
not specifically Daimajin, but ideas sort of like it. You know, because I unpacked this a little bit because I've covered the Daimajin movies. In Shintoism in Japan, they actually believe that all things in the universe are occupied by a kami, or you might have heard of yokai. It's sort of similar.
They live in watches, right?
Yeah, and everything. and everything. So the idea that you would have this giant stone idol and and you're praying to a god to help you, the idea that the god is of the kami, because that's the base, the basic translation of kami is god, little g god. The idea that it would be that would occupy the statue itself makes a lot of sense in Shintoism. But it's still a little bit weird here because basically Pulgasari is made out of rice and blood, near as we can tell.
Yeah, I gotta say, like, they throw some rice into the blacksmith creator's prison cell, and I guess through that and spit and who knows what else, like, he makes this incredibly good Pulgasari like model, and I'm like, dang, this guy missed out on having the most BA prison D&D campaign. Like, it's a real, like, he's got some miniature crafting skills there.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because that actually looks like a Bandai figure you could walk into a toy store and buy, which actually makes sense because Kim Jong-il had this crazy idea in his head that he was going to merchandise the snot out of this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I got Sophie Campbell's Red Bite right here, and it's basically Pulgasari right here. Fun rub figure.
Yeah. So I guess that kind of makes sense. Maybe that was intended to be a prototype or something for a toy that they could sell everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, like the little baby one that like stops a sword execution, that could totally go as like Tickle Me Pulgasari.
Oh my gosh, that puppet!
Which it's cute and gross at the same time, but I gotta know, like, the Pulgasari comes to life when some blood gets on it, and the children or the family of the blacksmith find it, and they're like, oh my gosh, a living monster golem, and are immediately like, all right, let's take it to bed with us. The next scene, like, he's tucked in the same bed as them, and then all right, I'm good for hijinks.
It's a cat or a dog or something. It's like, oh, he's so cute. We're gonna keep him around. Oh, he keeps eating metal and he keeps getting bigger, and he goes from little man Machin, who was a tiny pro wrestler, he played Minya, and then he's a very weird looking puppet in a couple of scenes, including the execution scene you're talking about, which I feel like that was both intentionally and unintentionally funny at the same time.
Yeah, that was just not what I expected at all. It's a pretty like dark setup for an execution. And then, just this little hand puppet comes out and fights the sword.
And it looks like they're literally just throwing the puppet at the actors, and they're just throwing it around and doing stuff. Like I said, it made me laugh, and I don't know if that was intentional or not. But, and then, he's like 6.5 feet tall. And then through the magic of jump cut, he's just, next scene, he's gigantic. That threw me off. I'm like, wait a minute, he's walking with people, which that's surreal enough, seeing this kaiju suit walking around with normal sized people, and then suddenly we just cut to another scene and he's gigantic. It's not like it was a jump cut for a transformation sequence or something. No, it's just he's big now.
Yeah, like it seems like he's not, it's hard to tell from perspective, but it seems like he might be shorter than a human, like just a big old bear cub. But he finds the armory and goes to town, and like, I don't know, maybe it's just the first time he's had regular access to metal. Now he can gorge himself, and off camera he can like sextuple his size.
He's supposedly 20 meters tall, which I'm kind of calling BS on that because scaling doesn't mean anything in this movie, like in a lot of kaiju movies.
Yeah. Maybe he's like fueled on the power of belief, and that's it. So like people believe he's bigger, and like those stories exaggerate, so he keeps getting more and more kaiju sized every time he shows up.
I don't know, because I give them credit. They built a quote unquote life size foot prop that they used in a couple of different shots, including one where our villain gets squished while he's tangled up in a curtain.
Like, I gotta say, this movie, like, it has a really great thematic climax, but when it comes to, like, actually defeating the enemy or, like, dealing with Pulgasari afterwards, like, it's really kind of just kind of breezed going by. Like, I don't know, it doesn't feel like the film really takes a moment to process that. It just happens.
Yeah, and the ending is baffling.
Mm.
I don't know what to make of that ending. For those who haven't seen the movie, I know we're kind of jumping all over the place, but so they defeat the tyrant, but Pulgasari keeps eating all the iron. So he's the oppressor now. And then Ami figures out that she has to do something or it's going to create this domino effect where they're going to have to invade other countries to keep feeding this thing. And then that's going to lead to a bunch of war. So somehow, we don't know how she draws this conclusion, she decides to go ring a bell, put herself in the bell, have Pulgasari eat the bell with her inside, and then Pulgasari petrifies, explodes, and then he's magically the baby again, turns into blue cartoon energy, and then floats over inside of Ami, who is just laying there amongst all the rubble, and you see tears coming down her face, and her eyes are closed, and I can't find anybody who can agree on if she's dead or not.
And weren't those like pretty drawn on tears too? Like, I mean, literally like blue crayon. I know.
No, they looked like real tears to me, but
maybe I'm thinking of the blood effect earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, they apparently couldn't do blood or something because it is like the worst like red marker effect I've ever seen.
Yeah. So I don't know what exactly is going on there other than because it was her blood that basically brought Pulgasari to life, or at least contributed to it, because we saw the little statue after it was made actually glowed a little bit, because the blacksmith was praying, like he was holding it up and praying, oh gods, please, use this to save my people or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's something going on there, but I guess the idea is that it's like some sort of blood connection between him and Ami, because she pricked her finger with the needle. And so that's actually utilized throughout the film, because the other characters are just assume that she can just tell this thing what to do, and it does it, which mostly works.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes he gets seemingly drunk on metal, though. Like,
he gorgeous.
He looks hung over, laying in the valley, and like, hey, Pulgasari, come on! And sometimes he gets up from the verge of death. Other times he's like, yeah, more.
I mean, we've all had food comas. We've all had a little too much turkey at Thanksgiving, and the tryptophan kicks in. I mean, this is just his version of that.
When it becomes every night, it becomes a problem. And when you're starting to eat the food and the farming implements of the surrounding villagers and cause a starvation issue, then it really becomes an issue. You should think about stopping.
Yeah.
Stop it. Get some help.
Stop it. This is your PSA, brought to you by Tomi Trembath.
And if you're eating farm implements, stop it. Get some help.
There's another meme for us. Oh my gosh. Like I said, it's a weird little movie. You talked about the beginning and how you were thrown off by the narrative. One of the things that threw me off with the beginning is that is very obviously a set. It is just almost transparently a set. And Ami's boyfriend, the leader of the bandits, he's sporting a wig that Liu Kang from Mortal Kombat would envy.
Yeah, that is a samurai cop wig right there.
No, oh my gosh, that wig. It's so obviously a wig. And this dude gets captured twice over the course of the movie. Pulgasari saves him the first time. Second time, he gets hanged.
Yeah.
They're like, beheading's too good for you. Bring the noose.
Well, yeah, because Pulgasari doesn't eat rope. They learn their lesson.
Yeah, well, it's pretty well established early on that Pulgasari, he's really only there because he wants to eat the swords. You know, that's all he's there for, because he's not going to eat the rope. And I will give the movie credit. It does foreshadow that Pulgasari is going to turn on them eventually, because he completely ignores people early on. Like, that scene by the lake. I mean, yeah, he kind of plays around a little bit in the lake with the characters, but once they bring him the farming tools, he just ignores them, goes off and eats.
They do really kind of make him into like almost an animal, but like you wonder like how like malicious of a force is this thing, or like, oh, I want to know why the gods apparently gave this thing life just to like become the next tyrant. Like, what's in it for this guy?
Yeah, which we'll get into, because that's the other thing that gets brought up a lot discussing this movie, is exactly how to interpret it. Given the unusual circumstances of its making, especially when, if you look at the history of North Korean cinema, almost all of it, up until Shin Sang-ok was involved, he made 7 movies basically as quote unquote a prisoner in North Korea. And him and his wife, they were, I'll get into it a little bit more in the Toku topic, but they were a power couple in South Korea. And because like he was directing he was making all these big movies in South Korea, and his wife was an incredibly popular actress. And so that's why they were brought over. And look at North Korean cinema, it was basically nothing but propaganda. Like, every movie that they were making was just propaganda. And it was propping up Kim Il-sung, who was Kim Jong-il's dad, or later on, basically propping up the regime, or taking shots at the South, the Japanese, or the Americans. That's really all they were. And presenting absolute loyalty to the great leader as paramount to everything. Then Shin Sang-ok comes in, and that kind of changes a little bit. So you have all of that, plus the bizarre circumstances, and people aren't quite sure what to make of this movie.
Yeah, it's kind of messed up. Like, there's sort of a recurring theme of like the nobility of starvation through this movie. Like, I mean, there's like a really touching scene early on when the blacksmith is getting starved in the prison cells, and like all of the rebels are doing like a hunger strike about it. And like, okay, and movie made someplace where I don't worry about the populace starving, this might like be more touching, but like, I'm worried if this is being like, and real heroes starve themselves for the greater good.
Yeah, which is the sort of sentiment that the regime would propagate. But at the same time, because I said, I read the I guess it's the autobiography. It's a book called A Kim Jong-il Production. And it talked about, in great detail, what happened with Choi and Shin. And to put it succinctly, I looked at that and I couldn't help but wonder if it was less about that and it was actually Shin using his own personal experience, because he was kept in prison and starved for a while by the North Koreans.
Dang. So like, I had heard some things about this, like maybe the couple being forced to split up by the North Korean government.
No, forced them to get back together. I'll get into that.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, thanks, Wikipedia.
Yeah, like I said, I will get into that because it is wild. So, but I do think you are correct. That's probably why, if this was meant to be subversive, this kind of secretly subversive indictment of the regime, and it went over Kim Jong-il's head, and maybe it was exactly for that reason, because it's extolling the virtue of starvation, as you put it.
Yeah, and I wonder what that then says about like this movie being about creating something greater than yourself to topple a regime. Like that in of itself, I'm kind of surprised got made, but like I don't know if that kind of comes around like, but if you do that, it's just gonna be even worse for you. Like look at Pulgasari, he becomes the very tyrant that he stopped.
Yeah,
So,
well, okay. You know what? Since we're talking about it, I'm going to go down to the three main interpretations that I found for this. And shout out to the YouTube channel Accented Cinema for his video on this that unpacked it a lot. So, to him, there's like I said, three different ways you could look at this. The movie on the surface seems like it's anti-monarchy, anti-feudalism, and anti-bourgeoisie. Our heroes are an army of farmers, workers, and bandits, which he says that parallels the guerrilla warfare that happened earlier on in the century, mid 20th century, to establish North Korea. And in that case, you could look at Pulgasari as representative of capitalism because it can free and enslave you. But he argues that doesn't really make sense because there are points where the movie humanizes Pulgasari, and a regime like North Korea wouldn't tolerate capitalism being presented in a positive light. I mean, when I was reading a Kim Jong-il production, there were frequent mentions by Choi and Shin where they're like, if you brought up capitalism, it would drive the Kim Jong-il and all of his cohorts crazy. Like they hated the whole concept. It was a trigger. So he argues that one interpretation is that Pulgasari is an iron-eating industrial monster. Okay? Because that's a big part of this. You find the iron because that's the technology of the day, right? So he argues in this regard, you could say that Pulgasari is the Soviet Union. What he says is that the Soviet Union's ideology was similar enough to North Korea. They helped establish the country. I mean, that's the whole Korean War thing. But but by the 80s, the USSR was starting to form friendlier relations with South Korea. So for North Korea, that made them look like a traitor. And now they had to completely rely on themselves, which was actually the official doctrine of North Korea at the time. It's called Juche, which means self-reliance. And that permeates everything that they do culturally and in their films. Like that is the word of the day for them. Okay, that sounds interesting. He says the second, but he argues that a second interpretation would be that the farmers are North Korean civilians waging guerrilla warfare against an industrialized enemy, which he says would be Japan, because Japan occupied the entire Korean peninsula from 1910 to 1945. And they were not kind. They were not kind. This is Imperial Japan pre-World War II. They're expanding and they're not treating anybody nicely. And after winning, after the North Koreans win, their liberator ruled them with an iron fist and lived in luxury. You're talking about him gorging himself and going into food comas, which Accented Cinema said that then means Pulgasari is Kim Il-sung, because he came around and he liberated North Korea from the Japanese and created a bunch of false legends about himself related to that. He's practically a superhero, in North Korea. So he looks at that as Shin making this a warning about how it's like, you think that that your savior Kim Il-sung is going to treat you nice. He's not. You need to wake up. So Pulgasari is that. I tend to trend more toward that one personally. The third interpretation that he presented was that he said the villain's a governor, but he said that is, it's not royalty. He's not a nobleman. He's not a businessman. None of that. A governor is a government position. And his goal is to take resources and make weapons. This, he says, makes them the North Korean government. And the film is criticizing what he called the Son Gun policy, which is the doctrine that puts the military first above everything else. And he said this didn't officially start until 1994, but North Korea was a huge military spender starting in the 60s. So he says, if this is the correct interpretation, this makes this a cautionary tale with a hypothetical revolution. And they get the help of an unspecified force, which could be America. It could be a lot of different things, he says. And this leads to an internal dictator or a foreign occupier, which is what Pulgasari becomes.
Like, has the director ever come out and said, like, one way or another, like, which way he was leaning toward this?
He insists that it's just a monster movie.
See, like, if I were to one day try and take this story and adapt it into something like a graphic novel biography or like a stylized film, like, I'd love to do something like Moulin Rouge, or better yet, like Sucker Punch. Like, we take a group of people and, like, they're making this fiction about something greater than themselves. That's also them trying to, like, make their act of rebellion or escape. Like, just kind of do that, like, multi-layer storytelling of, like, okay, what's in the movie, what's going into the making of the movie, and then what's going on in the lives of the people trying to bring this together. Like, there's a good 3-layer story right there.
Oh, for sure. And I was a little disappointed to find out that for Shin, he said this is just a monster movie. But even if I'm just thinking to myself, because especially once I actually get into the story of what was going on with him personally at the time, because this was the last movie he made for the regime. Him and his wife were able to escape after this. So they were kind of in the, at the point where they're like, okay, they're really trying to figure out how to plan their escape. So that might have factored into this. Plus they were being kept very busy. Maybe Shin didn't consciously intend anything by this movie, but watching it, especially if you know the full story about what was going on, I can't help but think that probably just trickled in subconsciously.
And I mean, let's not forget that, like, there's a lot of other voices going into this movie, presumably. So, like, who's to say what's maybe going in from either other Japanese cast members or even just, like, the locals. I mean, for God's sakes, they had literal conscripts working on this for free. So, like, yeah, if not subconsciously, there's got to be some level of that energy and just that toxic presence of those working conditions going into what then makes it onto the screen.
Yeah. Which ultimately makes this a little more complicated. It seems like a strangely simple movie on the surface, but I do think it can get kind of complicated the more you start delving into it. You know?
Now, unrelated, but do you know how they made their escape?
Oh, yes, I do. I'll get into that.
Heck yeah.
I'm saving that for the next segment. But anyway, going back to the movie itself. I know some people say this movie is boring. I wouldn't necessarily call it boring, personally. Although I do think the sound effects might have been stolen from Shaw Brothers. Some of them.
Yeah, like, it's got its slower moments, but, like, I'm really surprised that for something that was made to cash in on Godzilla so clearly, like, it doesn't look like any of the Godzilla movies. I don't feel like it pulls too, like, liberally from any of those. Like, also its setting is so different. Like, honestly, both with this and with Galgameth, like, I think that's really the big thing of, like, okay, even when this isn't good, it's, like, really one of the only options we have for, like, medieval kaiju movies. So, like, that alone kind of gives it some merit, or at least keeps it interesting. And, like, yeah, I just really love the way they do the story, and, like, seeing the kaiju fighting alongside an army of rebels. Like, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. This takes, I did look up when it takes place, but it's about 1,000 years ago. And you're right. There are precious few kaiju movies, at the very least, that take place in, say, the Middle Ages or in feudal eras, which is why I do it invites the Daimajin comparison, because that takes place in feudal Japan.
Yeah, would you say, like, should I be considering Daimajin as follow-up viewing or like homework from this?
I would definitely at least watch the first one. I think the first one's the best. All three of those movies were made over the course of a year, and they were all released in 1966. And the second one's a kind of a slightly inferior remake of the first one. The third one gets pretty different, but I would definitely say at the very least watch the first one.
Okay.
And you'll see what I mean by how similar it is. And definitely look for the remastered version, whether on disc or streaming, that was put out by Arrow, because it's gorgeous.
Mm-hmm. But like, yeah, I can at least see, depending on what people are used to watching. I mean, if you're just watching mostly modern movies, this is going to probably read as pretty boring, especially the human scenes that aren't related to Pulgasari himself. Mm-hmm. Like, really, everything leading up to his appearance is kind of slow. And I mean, it is about people in prison. And mm-hmm. like, I mean, it's got some Shawshank parallels, like guys mm-hmm. Carving figurines to orchestrate his escape or his revenge. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like, it's not the most eventful thing until we mm-hmm. get our little baby dinosaur.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes place during the Koryo dynasty, which was 935 to 1395.
And I don't know what that corresponds to as far as like Japanese imperialism being a presence in North Korea's history.
No. There was not really a presence at the time.
Okay, because I was curious, like, I wouldn't be able to recognize from the visuals, but I didn't know if the governor like has that kind of like Japanese coding to them, or if it seems like more strictly North Korean.
I mean, I could see that. I mean, even some of the character names I felt like seemed a little more Japanese sounding than Korean to me. You know, Ami, that's our main protagonist, the blacksmith's daughter, Inde, her boyfriend. Those sound a little more Japanese to me, admittedly. But, you know, I've never heard the name Inde before except in this movie. So, I mean, I could be speaking completely out of turn, but all the other Korean names that I've heard in these other Korean kaiju movies sound much more Korean to me. So, I don't know. Maybe it's a translation thing.
Anything else we want to cover before we start really diving into the film's history?
Oh, yeah, the Toku topic. Yeah, I'm going over my notes here really quick to see what other things. The panning shot at the end with the destroyed castle reminds me a lot of a similar shot in Godzilla 54 after Godzilla devastates Tokyo. And I do want to comment on we get three main attacks on Pulgasari in the course of the movie, and they're all very different. So, the first time they try to, is that the fire? Was that the fire was the first one? Yeah, it was the fire, the exorcism, and then the cannons. So they lure him into a cage and they burn him. And then what I love about that is that the fire doesn't work and it just makes him all hot and bothered. And they actually realized that by just beaming a red light on him, and it actually works. I don't think they did anything to the suit. They just put a red light on him. And then because he's made of metal, he jumps into water and literally boils everybody to death. I've never seen that done anywhere else.
Yeah, like that was maybe the most gruesome of the deaths, just like sympathizing with the people boiling in that moment.
Yeah. And then the second one is the weird one, because they get this idea in their head, which just muddies the waters about what exactly Pulgasari is, because now our villains are thinking, oh, he's inhabited by the soul of the blacksmith. So we need to go get a local exorcist lady and her troupe of backup dancers to come to an exorcism to get the soul of the blacksmith out, and then we're gonna bury him in rocks.
I mean, I think that's maybe the most logical of any of their ideas. Like, this thing's physically invincible. I don't know why they thought fire was gonna work on the thing that's like mostly metal, but yeah, like, okay, you're getting attacked by some weird like revenge spirit monster. Yeah, call Ghostbusters. Like,
Except these Ghostbusters like to do interpretive dances to bust them ghosts.
Hey, like there's a lot of powerful like ritual in dance. I see what they're doing, and like yeah, that plus the like cave-in, like yeah, I think that's maybe the best they thought. I think even the Canon's idea, like inventing new technology to take this on, you're still just launching something hard at him, and
and it literally backfires because one of the cannonballs goes into his mouth and then shoots back out.
Oh yeah, and the like little pipe whistle sound effect they do, whoop, whoop, going in and out.
Yeah, but the funny thing is the exorcism actually worked for a while. That was the crazy part, because he actually seems like he's freaking out from the exorcism, and then he falls into this canyon, and then they cause the avalanche and they bury him, and then for a while all of our heroes are like, oh crap, what do we do? What do we do? And then Ami decides, oh, I'm gonna find where he is, cut my arm, give him some more blood, and then he pops. That's one of the funniest looking effect scenes in the whole movie. Is he just like wee, and it's got some cartoony sounding sound effects for it. It's like pew!
Like,
what?
I'm surprised that the third plan wasn't just to like, all right, let's all pray about it really hard. That kind of worked last time.
Yeah, it kind of worked last time, but no, they decide that we're going to invent some cannons, which the cannons do look impressive. I will say that the lion gun and the general gun, which I got to hit the rim shot for that, because in my Kaiju novella Destroyer, I have a character whose name actually is General Gun, but it's with two N's because it's a surname. So it made me snicker a little bit. And you can tell that the General Gun is basically our, made in the image of our villain. So I'm guessing that he's probably like, yeah, totally use that. It'll look like I killed this thing.
Yeah. And I was surprised, like, there's a lot of differences with the American remake with Galgameth, but, like, the plans to destroy the monster are pretty well paralleled between the two. Mm-hmm. Like, they at least do the cannon and the fire one, and then, yeah, the movie actually kind of works on their third plan, but...
Yeah, well, and the other... I haven't seen Galgameth in a hot minute, but for what I remember about it... Yes, Jimmy, back in Kaiju Quarantine 2 in 2020. He's got to keep me honest here. They also made Galgameth the actual very clear hero in this, and not this kind of weird, we're not sure kind of a thing like with Pulgasari.
Yeah, like, I think my big problem with the American one was, like, there actually is some... like interesting messaging and like themes you can pick apart in this movie, whereas like Galgameth instead takes all these ideas of like resistance and rising up against a like oppressive regime, and instead makes it about nepotism. Like this kid's just like literally born a prince, and we find out in the first scene he's a friggin' coward, and like they're all constructing situations around making him look good, and then he's just given this giant kaiju that it was apparently in the family. Maybe they like through some trade got the actual Pulgasari statue for all we know. But regardless, like everything is just handed to the main character, whereas like there's way more sacrifice and like communal action that goes into everything in Pulgasari.
Yeah, and going back to some of the other special effects, they have an animatronic head for Pulgasari that they do for some of the close-ups that I actually thought was pretty effective. I'm guessing Teruyoshi Nakano, who was the special effects guy on this and for Toho at the time. If you've watched Return of Godzilla or Godzilla 1985, whichever version you prefer, they had built an animatronic head for close-ups like that, so I'm wondering if maybe that factored into this. Although I gotta admit, toward the end, Pulgasari's little freak-out face was kind of hilarious.
Oh yeah, I liked his like facial expressions later on. They really did well with that.
Yeah, that freak-out face, that's a GIF waiting to happen. That's a reaction GIF waiting to happen. Someone needs to make that.
What I see that they did not get any better at in like the 10-15 years between the adaptations making small things look small or suit actors look small. Like, it looks pretty bad in Pulgasari. Like, I would compare it to the gremlin in that one Twilight Zone episode on the plane. It's like, you're
Oh,
just
yeah,
far
Terror
away
at
from
20.
that guy.
Yeah, Terror at 20,000 feet.
And like
With
in
William Shatner.
Galgameth, it's just like a guy in a Barney suit that they're filming from the ceiling. Like, there's no convincing like aspect as far as like the suit actor compared to the set around him. Like, this ain't Ant-Man.
Yeah, no, it's not. Yeah, but like I said, there are scenes where I feel like it was trying really hard to, and obviously this is well before either of these, but it's trying really hard to be like a Braveheart or a Lord of the Rings in terms of just sheer scope with the battles and the extras. And I think that goes back to the fact that Kim Jong-il was trying to have North Korean cinema produce something that was like a Kurosawa film. And Kurosawa, among the many things that he did, he was known for his samurai film. So I think he wanted something that was just as large and grand in scope, and it just comes across really weird, especially when you know the context.
Yeah, as far as trying to pass it off like similar movies, like our joke about Galgameth was like, this is the kind of movie you'd see advertised as Dragonheart 2, like in Italy or in South America. Or like
that's funny that you say that, because there was a like a weird dinosaur movie made in South Korea in I think the early 90s that found its way into American bootleg circles, and they marketed it as Yongari 2.
I don't even know Yongari 1.
Well, Yongari, Monster from the Deep, 1967.
Oh, dang. Well, that's weird that they thought that would like make it make more money. Pre-hysteria too.
Hey, it's bootleggers. They got to make a buck somehow,
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, so there you go. And obviously I should have brought this up. We had Burning Pulgasari before Burning Godzilla. That's just kind of funny. But yeah. So overall, I mean, I think it's solid, but and I do think it's better than I think people give it credit for. It's hampered by the fact that when you know what went into the making of it, it becomes a little disappointing and a little difficult to watch. When you're looking at these big battle scenes, all these extras, and you have to tell yourself, all those poor people just got grabbed out of, got grabbed by soldiers and forced to be in this movie for free.
Yeah, like, I mean, I thought it was bad enough just knowing that, like, oh yeah, the crew making this movie like was kind of doing this against their will. Like, that's messed up, but makes me feel okay pirating it.
Well, I said, it's treated as if it's in public domain.
Getting any like entertainment out of that level of human suffering, feels icky.
And I do want to comment on this because Nakano just made Return of Godzilla. The rocket arrows, those were kind of hilarious. I thought they were a little anachronistic because they're clearly meant to be basically medieval missiles. But from what I was reading, there's like, actually, they probably would have had stuff at least kind of like that at the time. It's not as weird as you might think, because like fireworks were invented in China in 700 AD. So they're like, it's not that weird, but it's clearly done because they look like missiles. And, you'll shoot your eye out, kid. Apparently Pulgasari does have a weak spot, and it is his eye, because he did bleed from it, from that one arrow he caught.
Yeah, he shrugged it off like a champ, though. Like,
yeah,
he pissed him off.
Yeah, I just thought that was funny, but clearly it must have just like nicked him or something, because he bled, but he still had his eye. So, either that or it grew back. I don't know, but
maybe he's more like scent or motion based in his perception.
We're
tiny to him. Like, he just has to walk in their general direction, and he gets the job done.
Oh no. I think it'd be a bad idea for Jurassic Park to add him to the to the park.
I don't know. Like, anything could have made Jurassic World 3 better. So I'm behind this. I'd rather a Pulgasari than giant locusts for no reason.
I see what you mean there. I do see what you mean there. All right. Well, looking over my 15 pages worth of notes, I think we've covered enough about the film itself. I do think, looking at this, I think I actually have more notes on the Toku topic this time around. Yeah, actually, only about 5.5 pages are on the movie itself, and the rest are the Toku topic.
Oh wow, we've been here for an hour, Nathan.
Yeah, don't worry. I've been trying to figure out how to streamline it. So
I think we've touched on it a lot already. It seems.
Yeah, we have, but now we're going to get into it in a greater detail. Are you a kaiju collector hunting down that hard-to-find event-exclusive Marusan, a rare marmot, or the latest Bandais? Then Jay Key at Toku Toy Town is your new best friend. His online shop is committed to bringing serious collectors and casual fans alike the best, rarest, and coolest in the wide world of tokusatsu collectibles. You'll find everything from Godzilla to Ultraman to Kamen Rider to Super Sentai and more. Love glow-in-the-dark vinyl? They have plenty. Love Safubi? They're your one-stop shop. They even sell non-tokusatsu items and Japanese books and magazines on your favorite giant monster franchises, all at unbeatable prices. Your items will come carefully packaged to ensure your new treasures arrive intact and ready to grace your shelf. Most importantly, Jay understands your journey because he's a collector too. So, visit Toku Toy Town and use the exclusive code MIFV for 10% off your order, Kaiju Lovers. No minimums to buy, unlimited uses, fast shipping, and the best customer service around. Again, that's TokuToyTown.com, where toys make us happy. All right. First, before we actually get to the story of Shin and Choi, I do want to lay down a little bit of basic groundwork with this. By the way, quick recommendation. I mentioned the book, a Kim Jong-il production that was written by Paul Fisher. I do highly recommend. He goes into lots of detail. Like that's a good 350, 400 page book that really goes into tremendous detail about this. I also would recommend people, if you want a more digest version of it, look for a documentary called The Lovers and the Despot from 2016, which can be viewed on Tubi. But anyway, so really quick, like I said before, what happened to Shin and Choi was a very common occurrence at the time. In fact, from what I've read, an estimated 84,532 South Koreans alone were abducted by North Korea during the Korean War, which was 1950 to 1953. And then since the armistice, South Korea statistics claim that 3,800 more, which was mostly in the 70s, and Shin and Choi were two of them, were abducted, and only 489 are still being held as of 2006.
And as for all the people taken that are not actors and directors, like, what's the main purpose for these kidnappings?
Well, during wartime, they were targeting people who were educated or skilled, and most of the abductions were carried out by North Korean soldiers who had specific names that they were looking for. So, like, if someone was exceptional in their field, they would go look for them and find them and take them back to North Korea. A lot of them were captured while fishing in the Korean demilitarized zone, or the DMZ, and by North Korean agents. And that went they continued to do this all the way up into the 2000s. This quotation I have right here is from a Japanese scholar named Yoichi Shimada, who works at Fukui University. He's a professor there. And he thinks that North Korea abducted foreign citizens to, quote, eliminate witnesses who happen to run into North Korean agents in action, steal victims' identities and infiltrate agents back into the countries concerned, force abductees to teach their local language and customs to North Korean agents, brainwash them into secret agents, The fishermen nearly had access to valuable intelligence, but they still could be trained as spies and sent back to the South. And to use abductees' expertise or specific skills, like I said, special skills, or use the abductees as spouses for unusual residents in North Korea, especially lone foreigners such as defectors or other abductees.
Dang, that's all terrible is about all I can say about that.
Yeah, these are all spy novels waiting to happen right here, which is funny. This is hilarious. I say Kim Jong-il was a huge movie buff. One of his favorite series was James Bond. And the guy had this crazy idea in his head that the James Bond movies were docudramas. He thought it was real.
I mean, with the things he's made people believe about himself, I guess nothing in a James Bond film is that unbelievable.
Yeah. But here's the crazy thing. Only 19 wartime abductees were ever returned, which was actually a violation of the armistice. But North Korea claims that all the post-war abductees were defectors. Right, guys. So there's a lot of major cases that are related to that, that I don't quite have time to go into because I really want to focus on Shin and Choi. North Korea also abducted Japanese citizens. According to Wikipedia, quote, only 17 Japanese, 8 men and 9 women are officially recognized by the Japanese government as having been abducted, but there were hundreds more. And North Korea only admits to 13 of them. And these occurred in coastal areas of Japan and were very opportunistic. Kind of like we talked about before, if they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, they would get abducted. Most people were in their 20s, but the youngest one was a 13-year-old girl. Wow.
Yeah. Again, awful.
Yep. Some of them were abducted to teach Japanese and the Japanese language or Japanese culture and the spy schools. The older victims were abducted to obtain their identities. So again, very similar to what was going on before. Some of the women were used as wives. North Korea-based Japanese terrorists belonging to, that's who they were used for wives for, the Yodo-Go terrorist group in 1970, which actually hijacked Japan Airline. And you'll find out actually in one of the bullet points that Choi actually met another woman who had been abducted, and she found out that North Korea was not just taking people from South Korea and Japan, they were abducting people from all over the world. It was insane, and she met some of them. Now, thankfully, in December 2006, the UN did pass a resolution condemning North Korea for the abductions, even though they kept denying most of them. So that's very nice. There's a lot more stuff to go into with that. That's just to give everybody a sense of what was going on at the time, because this was very common. So now I'm going to try to go through a Reader's Digest version of Shin and Choi's story here. So, like I said, they were a power couple in the entertainment industry in South Korea, especially when South Korea was seen as an aid-dependent third world country at the time, because the South Korean economy was basically in shambles. After the Korean War, they changed regimes very frequently over the decades. Really, things didn't get all that stable until I think about the 90s. Choi was actually more famous than Shin. She used to work as a stage performer during the Korean War. She was rumored to have been a camp prostitute and a mistress for an American general. So there was some scandal kind of attached to her at the time, especially since she had basically run away from home to become an actress, and her family didn't really approve of that. And she was married before she met Shin, and divorce was basically impossible in Korea at the time, but she managed to do it so that she could marry Shin. They met in a city called Daegu, which is about 150 miles south of Seoul, in 1953, so after the Korean War. She was in a swashbuckling play that and had collapsed on stage, so she was taking a break at the time. And Shin had jumped up there and carried her to the hospital. So
that's pretty romantic.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's probably why she took a liking to him. And then he asked her if she would like to be in his semi-documentary called Korea, because he was breaking into the film industry at the time, and she accepted. And then, things progressed from there. They basically had a little bit of an affair, and, they were shamed for a while out of the film industry because of it. Choi sued for divorce and won, which, like I said, was very unheard of at the time. Her first husband was not a nice guy. He was pretty abusive from what I understand, which is a little bit of a theme for Choi's life before she met Shin, because she wasn't treated very well during the war when she was a performer either. To put it mildly, she endured some things that made it impossible for her to have children.
Wow. I don't have a good response to that, but
yeah,
I guess it is wild to me that comparing this to the United States film industry, to hear that a divorce was the major scandal of the time. It's
well, it's because of Korean culture. It was just,
I'm sure.
You just didn't, once you were married off, you were a woman, because Korean women for a long time did not have very many rights. So if you got married off to somebody, it was almost impossible to get out of it. So for a while, they ran a cheap motel and they just declared themselves married, because Shin didn't really believe in institutions. And he's just like, yeah, you're my wife, basically. They made 4 films together for their first 3 years of marriage. And then in 1959 alone, Shin directed his wife in 6 movies, and all of them were hits.
Is this kind of what switched them over to being a proper power couple?
Oh yeah. By the time you get to the 60s, Shin started his own studio, and his popularity was starting to explode, but it was in a large part because everybody loved his wife in these movies. Like I said, she was more popular than he was.
I think that's amazing though. Her being the face of these movies, getting all the attention, and it sounds like she was really the one more both deserving and in need of a redemption arc than he was. So
yeah.
Good for her.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't come from necessarily have the happiest of upbringings either. I think, if I remember correctly, I think he grew up poor. His hometown, when he was basically high school age, got absorbed into North Korea.
Oh.
So he couldn't go home.
I don't know. I'm not going to play Suffering Olympics, but
not
right
for
now
sure.
It seems like she's in the lead.
Yeah, I was gonna say for sure, but I think they gravitated toward each other because they had both been a little unhappy growing up. But like I said, Shin started his own studio. At one point, he was employing 300 people. They were making 30 movies a year, and they were also importing foreign films like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and The Big Boss. So American classics and Bruce Lee movies. And he had struck a deal with Shaw Brothers and was doing some work with them. So he was a big deal. But Shin's only loyalty was to film. It wasn't to politicians or the ideology. In fact, he didn't really like politicians. He made that frequently known. Now, he was friends with President Park, who was the leader of South Korea, which ended up backfiring on him a little bit later, as we'll get into. But Choi, like Korean culture, was caught between 2 eras. She was a dutiful wife and a beautiful actress and an activist for women's rights. She even became the first woman to officiate a wedding and directed 3 of her own films in the 1960s. She was unable to have children, like I said, which was shameful in Korean culture. So her and Shin adopted 2 children in the early 70s, and their names were, and I hope I say these right, Myung-im, I should say, and Jung-kyun. So there you go.
Very
so
sweet.
So meanwhile, over in the north, Kim Jong-il, he's a huge cinephile, like I mentioned. He was promoted to cultural arts director of the propaganda and agitation department. I had to double check that when I read it. It's like, the what? The agitation department? What? In September 1967, after the Kapsin Purge eliminated anything and anyone who disagreed with the state, and he was to guide it back to quote-unquote party's policies. Okay. And he established the Korean Film Studio lot, which was 10 million square feet, which was compared to MGM's lot in Culver City, California during the golden age of Hollywood. That was 7.6 million square feet. because he wanted North Korea to have, the best movies. That was his goal. He even wrote a book that apparently it sounded like from some of the sources I was looking at, you can actually go buy, which is just insane for me to think about. In 1973, it was called On the Art of Cinema. It was his treatise on his philosophy of filmmaking. Chief among his tenets was what he called the seed, which was the propagandistic message of a film. He likened it to a farmer planting seeds. That message was that Kim Il-sung, his dad, was a messianic figure and absolute loyalty to him was required. Otherwise, you were un-Korean.
I see they've carried on that tradition for
Yep.
a couple generations now.
Yeah, and like I said, he craved the recognition that Kurosawa was garnering for Japanese cinema because he loved movies and he wanted North Korean movies to be a vital cultural export. He just needed the right person.
So we wanted to make mad films. Kay doesn't make films, but if you did, they'd have a samurai.
So, like I said, needed the right person. We'll come back to that in a second. Meanwhile, in the 70s, one of Shin's great foibles is that he was good at making money, but he was bad at keeping it. His studio, Shin Films, was always on the brink of bankruptcy, and he played fast and loose with President Park's paranoid laws and rules, thinking that they were for ordinary people and not for him. And then we get to the point where he really starts screwing things up, poor Shin. He had an affair with one of his actresses.
Oh, no.
Who was a lot younger than Choi. And it produced a love child.
Oh, that's... you hate to see it.
Yep, and it devastated their relationship. She kicked him out, and then that turned into a public scandal, and it didn't look very good, and his studio ended up in such dire straits, they had to resort to making exploitation and softcore porn films to try to stay afloat.
Yikes.
And then here's the funny thing. Even after all that, it didn't completely destroy his career. No. What did it was he dared put a 3-second kiss in a Shin Film Shaw Brothers co-production called Rose and Wild Dog. And it got him in trouble with the government censorship office. And they, and then it turned into a lawsuit and his film career was over.
Dang, he really put his career on the line for a kiss more than once.
Yep.
Wow.
Go figure, right? And he stayed with this actress who was a mistress. They had another child together. And that's when Choi filed for divorce. Shin spent several years traveling abroad, hoping to restart his filmmaking career, while Choi, who despite everything still loved him, she stayed in South Korea caring for their kids and maintaining her Academy of Cinematic Arts, which was all she had left at the time. And that's important to know because she received an offer from a man named Wang Dong-il, who asked that she come to Hong Kong to discuss directing a film. Because like I said, she had directed a few of her own movies in the 60s, all right? She was desperate for money to save her Academy. So despite Shin warning her, the offer seems suspicious. So, they're not together, but he's still trying to look out for her. She went anyway. After a few days of whining and dining and meeting a Chinese woman who claimed to be a fan, she was taken to a harbor in Repulse Bay, which ironically was once a haven for pirates, where she was taken aboard a ship crewed by North Koreans and taken to, quote unquote, Kim Il-sung's bosom. By the way, the name of the script that she was offered during all these negotiations was called Woman Slave Ship.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, red flag.
Yeah, probably. So Kim Jong-il was the one who ordered Choi's abduction, and it wasn't his father, not Kim Il-sung. To her shock, he pampered her. He treated her very well. She was kept in a luxurious house with servants. He showered her with tailor-made gifts, fine clothes, fancy food. All she did mostly was be shown off at his drunk parties. which he used to find who was loyal or disloyal to him. He even had the female performers at the parties emulate her hairstyle and the long dress that he had her wear. He later had her attend a surprisingly less drunken birthday party for him, which he recorded with a Super 8 camera as fireworks exploded. Meanwhile, 2 weeks after she disappears, Shin is called by his contact in Hong Kong. The guy's name is Lee Young-sang, and he asked about her. He said to come to Hong Kong so he could explain, and there he explained that Choi had vanished. Shin recognized the name of the older woman with the daughter who helped abduct Choi. Her husband was a pro-North businessman. He left Hong Kong unable to solve the mystery. Shin worked for 3 weeks in the U.S. and met a friend, Kim Hyung-wook, who was the former KCIA chief. The KCIA is basically like the Korean equivalent of the CIA.
Dang, okay, I was piecing that one together.
Yeah. The news hit the papers in the South. Shin was bombarded with questions by reporters. Some suspected he was responsible for Choi's disappearance. He was met by police detectives in Hong Kong in February 1978 who interrogated him on suspicion of arranging the kidnapping, but he was thankfully released. He tried to acquire a fake passport after this so he could continue work, but the seller put a nylon bag over his head and knocked him out with a gas. They were North Koreans.
Dang, plot thickens.
Yep. And then meanwhile, while this is all going on, Choi mentioned that she met other people who had been abducted. She would take walks in the nearby woods, and there she met 2 foreign women. One was Jordanian, and the other one, who was named Catherine Hong, was from China. They were members of the many abductions carried out by Kim Jong-il, because he was according to this list that I found in the book, he was getting people from the South China Sea, the Sea of Japan, London, Copenhagen, Oslo, Macau, Hong Kong, Zagreb, Beirut, South Korea, China, and Japan. So this was considered basically a golden age of espionage because of all of this. And again, Kim Jong-il thought James Bond movies were docudramas.
I'm just surprised he was able to conduct all this largely unnoticed, or just that they were able to have the people to pull this off without raising any eyebrows.
Yeah, it is pretty impressive, but a lot of them are just denying anything that's going on at the time. So, it's pretty crazy. So, Shin has been abducted. He's not treated as well as Choi was. He wasn't getting wined and dined and shown off like she was. He did try to escape once during this time. Automobiles are rare and controlled in North Korea. He snuck out late and stole a car so he could escape to China. He wrecked the car and ran on foot, hiding in a freight train car for a while, but he was caught by guards stationed on the railway 10 miles from the Chinese border. He got that close.
That's painful.
Yeah. So he was sent to a detention center where he was frequently berated and starved. This is why I still wonder if the starvation scene in the movie might have come from his own experience. He carved the words, Shin Sang-ok died here in 1979 on his cell wall with a spoon. Attempting to escape was punishable by death, but Shin was spared because he swore to work for the dear leader. This became something that he had to do frequently. He lied through his teeth so much, putting up this ruse that he was loyal to keep himself alive. Shin was put under house arrest after this. He wasn't allowed to leave unless he was supervised by the deputy director. He planned his next escape attempt while feigning loyalty, like I said. Shin concealed himself for several days, hoping to seize an opportunity to escape, but he was found and sent to prison number 6, which was called an enlightenment center, instead of being executed. I love the irony that it's prison number 6. Because anytime you see a story and they number something 6, it's like second only to 13 as the most unlucky thing. Among other abuses, Shin was forced to sit in his cell cross-legged, which was called the torture position, for 16 hours a day. The slightest movement or sound was met with a beating. He would be there for 2.5 years. And it finally ended when he went on a hunger strike for 3 days and collapsed.
Okay, I'm seeing some common themes here.
Yep. Then Choi, after leaving the guest house, she was reunited with Catherine, and Catherine, quote unquote, baptized Choi as a Catholic in a forest and gave her the name Madeline. And then this religion became a secret code for them. Later, Catherine was moved elsewhere, and they never saw each other again. So Shin languished in the prison for another 1.5 years after his hunger strike. And you know how you were saying, like, you read someplace that, you know, that the North Koreans broke him up, and I said, nope. Here we go. Shin and Choi were reunited by Kim Jong-il at a party at a nightclub. Shin was appointed film advisor and Choi representative of Korean women. A wedding ceremony was held for them April 15th, the great leader's birthday. Shin and Choi were moved to a home together. They slowly rekindled their relationship and told each other what had happened by turning on all the faucets and whispering to avoid eavesdropping. One little detail I didn't mention in there is that when Kim Jong-il reunited them, he basically just declared to everybody that they were married again.
Guess he's got the authority.
Yeah, for sure.
Is that how all weddings happen there?
I would assume not. I don't know. I don't know what North Korean wedding customs are. It might be. You know.
Ask someone while
Sure,
you're there.
Jimmy, you try looking that up. Anyway, so while Shin enjoyed a filmmaking challenge like improving North Korean films, his and Choi's main motivation was making Kim Jong-il happy so they could escape. So they had a dinner meeting with Kim Jong-il, and this doesn't get brought up quite as much in the book, but if you watch the documentary, you actually hear excerpts from this thing.
Whoa.
It's wild. They would have dinner with Kim Jong-il, who, by the way, one thing I should mention is that Kim Jong-il at this point is technically not the leader of North Korea. He's the number 2 man under his father. His father's still alive at this time. But his father was so old and was in such failing health that he was, for all intents and purposes, in charge. He didn't officially become the leader of North Korea until the 90s. But anyway, he would have dinner with the two of them, and they secretly recorded him with a tape recorder in Choi's handbag.
Wow. Like, now I want to pull up that documentary just for the audio.
They play excerpts from it. They got 45 minutes of this 2-hour dinner. It was the first time Kim Jong-il's voice had ever been heard publicly. Because I'm trying to jumping ahead a little bit. When they defected to because the end, here's the little, spoiler warning for the end of the story. They do defect to the United States, and they gave these tapes to the Americans.
You see, guys, this is why Kim Jong-il thought that James Bond movies were real.
Yeah. So this was dangerously illegal. What was captured was mostly dealt with why he kidnapped them. Choi was taken first to lure Shin there. She wasn't even the real target. And he claimed that separating them wasn't his plan, but the bureaucrats who were responsible were punished. I have my doubts about that, but okay.
Someone was probably punished, but, I'm not going to say they were responsible.
No, I'm just saying I'm not so sure that, it was the bureaucrats who really did all of this. Because supposedly Kim Jong-il was a massive fan of Shin's movies. Because Kim Jong-il had his own private library of movies that only he got to see. Nobody else in North Korea got to see him because he got to see all the foreign movies. People living in North Korea would be, they would just get to see all the propagandistic movies that they were making. He got to watch the good stuff from Japan and America and all that fun stuff. Mostly by illegally importing bootlegs, but
I would love to know how Pulgasari stacks up to like literally every North Korean made film up to that point. Like, I don't know how the other Shin films were, but like, is this best movie of all time for them? Top 10?
It's the most expensive at the time. I don't I don't know how many North Korean movies you can just walk into a video store or fire up a streaming service and actually find. I don't even know if the other 6 movies that Shin and Choi made for North Korea can be easily accessed outside of it. I've heard a lot of descriptions of them, and I know what happens in them, and I know what at least a few authors consider to be the best ones of the lot, which is not Pulgasari. In fact, Mr. Fisher, who wrote a Kim Jong-il production, was not nice to Pulgasari at all. But I think it's mostly because he doesn't understand kaiju.
Were the other films he had Shin make like also in the realm of like fantasy or?
Nope, they weren't fantasies. I'm about to get to those, so I'll let you know here in a second. So Shin would direct films under Kim Jong-il's supervision while Choi starred in them and trained a new generation of actors. Both of them would travel abroad to film festivals to show the films. Shin found the inefficiencies of the North Korean film industry frustrating. There wasn't a sense of urgency. Time was perceived differently. These people are so oppressed, they don't understand time properly. It's insane. Shin's first film for the regime was called Emissary of No Return. It was an historical drama about the Hague, quote-unquote, secret emissary affair, end quote, in 1907. This version was based on the, quote-unquote, official history in North Korea. They had to scout locations to film scenes abroad. And they even saw a flag above a U.S. embassy, and they were planning to escape to one someday. So that was the first one. Shin suggested to Kim Jong-il that they move the new Shin film, the little studio he started for him, to a neutral place like Vienna. And the dictator agreed. Shin and Choi said that Kim Jong-il was a sociopath, but he wasn't a madman. In other words, he was a quote-unquote, an archetypal film producer. That just cracks me up there. So they made 7 films in total, like I said, but only the first 2, Emissary and its follow-up, which was called Runaway, those were nationalistic dramas. The others, according to Mr. Fisher, actually broke the mold. One was called Love, Live, My Lover. This was a lighthearted romantic melodrama, and it was the first romance depicted in a North Korean film. And it was the first time the word love was said in a North Korean movie. And it had the first on-screen kiss.
That's some Orwellian scenery right there. That's rough.
Yeah. The next one, which I think this was the one I most often read be cited as the best movie that Shin made in North Korea. It's called Salt. It's a social realist tragedy that had to do, if I remember correctly, the plot took place in the 1920s, if I remember correctly, and it had to do with salt mining. And it included nudity and a quote-unquote harrowing rape scene, none of which was previously allowed. And it was shown in Moscow and got a standing ovation. And it was Choi was there personally to show the movie. And she said it was the biggest recognition she had ever gotten.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. The next was The Tale of Shin Chong, which was an extravagant musical with fantasy creatures. That's all I could really find about it.
Okay, but potentially laying some groundwork for Pulgasari there.
Possibly, and the next one certainly did. The next one was Hong Gil-dong. Hong Kil-dong. Sorry. I've also seen it called Hong Gil-dong, which was North Korea's first martial arts movie. And it's based on a figure in Korean folklore who's basically Robin Hood. Interestingly, there was an animated movie, the first animated movie ever made in South Korea, in, I believe it was 1967, based on this figure. And that just not, I shouldn't say just, but that has been released by SRS Cinema. So fun little fact there. So those were all the pre-Pulgasari movies. So during all of this, Shin and Choi pushed the country's stringent boundaries and gave the audience, who went to the theater an average of 20 times a year, a taste of the extraordinary in their hyper-controlled lives. They actually helped to develop a real pop culture in North Korea. Shin was subtly subversive in his films, which is why I have a hard time believing that that didn't extend to Pulgasari. So to give you an example, in Hong Kil Dong, the hero chooses exile over struggling for his country's collective dream. Several of these films were critically and financially successful abroad in Eastern Europe. Choi even won an award for one in Moscow. I think that was Salt. They were slowly granted more freedom with each success. Whenever they would go visit outside of the country, which they said it was always incredibly hard on them because they're like, we're out of the country, but we're not really free of them. And it's because Kim Jong-il had 120 bodyguards. They were all fanatics, and they would all guard Shin and Choi on their trips.
Okay, so yeah, not exactly easy to slip away from something like that.
Nope. They needed something big and sensational to pitch to Western Europe, Japan, and even America. That's where Pulgasari comes in. And that, like I said, that was the last one that he actually made.
Mm.
It was his biggest hit. As I said, claims it's just a pure monster film. All right. And Mr. Fisher argues it saved his and Choi's lives. So after this, Kim Jong-il finally approved the Vienna office for Shin to work on his next movie, which was going to be called Genghis Khan. I don't know exactly what the movie was going to be about. Judging by the title, I'm assuming it's going to be about that historical figure, but I don't know what else that would have entailed. But this was the opportunity to escape that they wanted. All right, here's the part where I'm thinking this needs to be made into a movie. Like when I got to this part of the story, I'm like, this needs to be a movie. Like my friend, the Omniviewer, said, like, you get like Spielberg or Kenneth Branagh to work on this. And like, because like this next sequence of events I'm going to regale seems like something that would be in a thriller. It's crazy. So they're in Vienna. Shin and Choi were on a 6-week trip that took them to several places, including the Berlin Film Festival in preparation for Genghis Khan. So in Vienna, Shin and Choi stayed at the Intercontinental Hotel Wien. I hope I said that right, which was a notorious Cold War hotbed for diplomats, spies, and defectors. So you already got the perfect setting right there for a thriller. They convinced their bodyguards to watch them from afar so they could speak with a Japanese journalist named Akira Inoki, who, if I remember correctly, they had actually sent him some letters, which is how the news of their kidnapping actually got broke to the rest of the world in 1984. The receptionist was Japanese, and Shin and Choi slipped him a note in English and Japanese saying they wanted to seek refuge in America or get arrested by the Austrians. They met the journalist the next day, and with their handlers far away, Shin shoved the journalist and his wife into a car and told the taxi driver to drive around for a while. The bodyguards followed them in another taxi. They got caught in traffic 50 yards away from the American embassy at the bottom of a hill. Shin and Choi got out of the car and ran on foot to the embassy.
That's film climax material right there. Oh my God.
It really is. They were later met by the American in charge, who said the Japanese receptionist had contacted them. They were taken to a nearby residence, and a pink rose was given to Choi, who cried.
I'm sorry, is there some symbolism with the pink rose?
I don't know. It just said that they left her a pink rose.
I mean, that's still beautiful imagery, but
it really is. Like I want this movie so bad. So here's the funny thing. This all happened, and the North Koreans are accusing the Americans of kidnapping them, which is hilarious. And Kim Jong-il was so upset. This is why when I watched the movie, I was looking. I wanted to see if this was the print that did this. He was so angry. He had Shin's name expunged from the credits because the movie was still playing in North Korean theaters at the time. Now, the print that I watched still had his name on it, to my surprise.
Now, like, was it written in characters you're able to read?
The version I saw subtitled the credits, and it still had his name there.
Okay.
I might want to double check it with with like a Google Translate app just to make sure, but it was still there.
Yeah, I heard that was like a motivating factor in him making the Adventures of Galgameth, since they get some credit for this story.
Yeah, and it took about another 20 years or so for the North Korean film industry to collapse without them. But here's the thing. Unfortunately, Shin and Choi's kids, they got a lot of cruel comments when their parents escaped because everyone was calling them the children of a kami. So it was happy, but it was a little bit of a mixed response as well. 3 years later, Shin and his family moved to, well, I should say right after this, after they were kept at the embassy for 4 days, they went to DC and stayed in a safe house and then officially defected to the United States. And they gave the tape that they had used to record Kim Jong-il to a U.S. official who had a Korean wife. So 3 years later, Shin and his family moved to California so Shin could start a new filmmaking career. He took the quote-unquote Christian name Simon Sheen after converting to Catholicism at Choi's request, and Choi never acted in Hollywood. She fell out of place, and Shin's career in Hollywood never reached the heights that he had reached in Korea, unfortunately. He did Legend of Galgameth, which Mr. Fisher says was a quote-unquote Disney Channel remake of Pulgasari.
I mean, stylistically, yes. Like, it feels very Disney Channel, but you can kind of tell that this had to have been made with, like, film production budget and supplies, since, like, it's widescreen. And honestly, you'd get at least one recognizable actor in a Disney Channel remake.
Yeah. And he made that after he tried making some failed political thrillers pertaining to Korea. But you might be surprised to find out what his greatest Hollywood success was. Did you grow up watching Three Ninjas?
Barely. I think I only saw the Hulk Hogan one.
He created Three Ninjas.
Huh. Good for him.
And I know he directed at least one of the movies.
So
if you go find them and you see the name Simon Sheen, that's him.
Dang, okay.
Yep. So Shin and Choi relocated back to South Korea in 1999. It was a much more prosperous and democratic place by then, but they were scorned by their people and used as political pawns by both conservatives and leftists in the country. So they were lightning rods, unfortunately. In the 90s, though, Shin served on the jury for the 1994 Cannes Film Festival, along with Catherine Duave, I hope I said that right, and Clint Eastwood. And they bestowed the Palme d'Or on Pulp Fiction. Shin was the subject of an 11-film series at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and his films are studied in schools in South Korea, America, and abroad. He died April 11th, 2006. And in case anyone's wondering, Kim Jong-il died December 17th, 2011, and he was succeeded by his son, Kim Jong-un. I have opinions about him.
Let's not voice them while you're in North Korea. They're listening.
Nobody's listening in North Korea. What are you talking about? Except maybe the petulant child. I don't know, because that's really what he is. He's a petulant child and put in charge of a country. And Choi died April 16th, 2018. So that's the whole wild story.
Wow.
It's crazy.
But yeah, well, thank you for saving me a bunch of research on this. I will be checking out that documentary, but yeah, I got the bullet points. I'll start working on the graphic novel.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, I'll send you my notes if you want that. And definitely, check out a Kim Jong-il production. It's a great source. And it goes into so much detail. Like, I learned so many things about how North Korea works reading that book. And it's nuts. It's nuts. We tend as Americans to think of dictators as these strong men, that are basically intimidate everybody into submission. We tend to think of like Soviet leaders as being like that, like a Vladimir Putin. It's not quite like that at least with Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-il, especially in North Korea. His dad might have been a bit of a strong man, but Kim Jong-il mostly relied on basically mass gaslighting to keep people in line. Just constant lying to people to keep them in submission. It's gross. It's so gross reading about what he did to his country. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else we want to touch on? I feel like we've given the horrors of North Korea enough attention.
Yeah, we have. Let's start wrapping things up. All right, Tommy, I know we gotta wrap things up here kind of quick, but I did want to go over a little bit of listener feedback. But this one, I think, is, like I said, very relevant with you here, because it's a comment from MIFV Max number 30, where I interviewed our friend James Santana.
Oh, hey, James.
Yeah, so we got a comment here from Edwin Gonzalez, who has become one of my most hardcore listeners. And he has this nicely involved comment right here where he says, "Hey, was glad to learn about someone else bringing out their own universe. It's the third." Oh, by the way, for those who don't know, James Santana is the founder of Toku USA Studios, and he ran a very successful Kickstarter campaign for basically a preview issue of a bunch of titles that he's going to be launching under this new comic book label, and they're all tokusatsu related.
Yeah, he's been interviewed on both our shows.
Yes, been interviewed on both of our shows, and both of us are producing comics for him.
That's not yet for me, but he and I are talking about it.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, he's mentioned you a few times, so I'm like, oh, we must be in talks to get this published. All right. So Edwin goes on to say, "It's the third project I ever backed on Kickstarter. I'm excited about the project and to really explore Gus characters." I think that's a typo. I'm not sure what he's trying to say.
Probably his character. Like,
Maybe
no one
autocorrect.
Autocorrect.
Yeah. Please clarify, Edwin. Let me know when you hear this.
Look at a keyboard. They're right next to each other.
Yeah. I fell down the indie comic rabbit hole because of Toku-inspired comics, and I'm happy to stay there for content like this. All three projects I've backed have been Toku-inspired heroes: Inferno Girl Red, MMPR The Return, and Nebulon.
Oh, hey, I've had the writers of all three of those on my show.
Great. Yeah, just the summaries have me hyped. Nebulon. So basically, venomized Yugi Moto in Night Armor. This is for the highlights. For Nate, thanks for bringing on people with their passion and projects. Nebulon would have slipped my radar. Thank you. I wouldn't be this really into Rangers Kamen Rider again. If Andy Sandberg can write a comic, you of all people should be writing one. A joke I've been sitting on for a while. Didn't think it through, though. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Edwin. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I live for stuff like that. I mentioned to you, I think it was before we were on the air, that I actually got a message from Edwin telling me that he used one of my episodes as a source for a paper he was writing, and now he's graduating, and he was very grateful for it.
Oh, congrats, Edwin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And now it's time for the Patreon shout-outs.
I shall ask thee once again, will you chant my name?
Danny Damana, Eli Harris, Bex from Redeemed Otaku, Damon Noyes, The Cellcast, Eric Anderson, Ted Williams, Winja the Ninja, Christopher Reiner, the indiscreet one or indiscreet one, please let me know, Jay Cambrick, Matt Walsh, but not that Matt Walsh, Jonathan Cartwright, Leon Campbell, Michael Watson, Tofu Fury! All right, and with that, I need to let people know what we've got coming up down the pipeline. So we have the Cellcast Patreon episode that I'm calling the Zillow Beast Saga, with 2 episodes of Star Wars The Clone Wars and 3 episodes of Star Wars The Bad Batch, all centered around the Zillow Beast, because this show wears its influences on its sleeve.
I'm not familiar with the Zilla Beast, or I've not watched Clone Wars or Bad Batch.
Yeah, the Zillow Beast, for those who don't know, is actually a kaiju who has appeared on both of these animated Star Wars shows, and Zilla. Very, very classic kaiju inspired.
I see what they did there.
Yes, Jimmy, you have mixed feelings about this because you're a prequel hater. Ugh. You need to get over that, man.
What can you do?
What can you do? All right, and then just before G-Fest, we move on to the much safer country of Thailand, which has a few kaiju films to its name, but we're going to be discussing its most recent one, which is called The Lake, with my friend, the editor of the Kaiju United website, Jacob Lingle. Have you heard of The Lake?
I've not.
Yeah, it's an interesting little movie. I wouldn't, I'm kind of telegraphing a little bit here. I might feel differently watching it again, and this time in the original language. I didn't think it was great, but it did get a fair amount of hype in the kaiju sphere for a little bit there, and the filmmakers certainly thought that they had something cool on their hands because they were hyping it pretty hard as well.
But all right, I'll be curious to hear about that one then.
Yeah. All right. And now, Tommy, this is where you get to do your shameless self-promotion, because that's just a staple of my show. So I'm going to cut you loose and you can plug all that needs plugged.
Awesome. Thank you. So first and foremost, what I'm really hoping to find some backers for is my tokusatsu-inspired comic launching on Kickstarter this August. It's called When We Transform, and it focuses on a character that's kind of similar to like a Power Ranger. But imagine a character goes into their transformation sequence, cut to stock footage, trippy effects, and then they're stuck there for over 20 years and wind up in a world that's very different than what they left. Their team is now gone, and they're now in a place where they're able to have some very important realizations about themselves. And this book is about kind of coming to terms with that and approaching the people that thought they were lost. Something special about the book that no one else has done before. We're going to have a special edition color-changing variant cover with variant color-changing pages inside. I can't quite show it off with webcam, and my special frame for it's at work right now, but yeah, if like y'all have ever heard of the Blacklight edition of Radiant Black issue 10, this is kind of like that, only taken to the next level. Like, I found this company, Colorimetry Lights, at Electric Forest last year. They do like black lights, but on steroids with color changing handheld lights that like move and change despite being stationary images. So I got in contact with them. I'm now doing some stuff in collaboration and making the first ever comic book to incorporate this tech into the comic medium. So that'll be a special edition of the book that'll come with posters and some prints with this tech, so you get a lot of bang for your buck. But yeah, please back the book. I'll admit there's some trans themes to it, but it's also going to be continued by a web series follow-up that'll be ready to launch the month following a successful campaign. And yeah, I've been working on it for 2 years, and if you love tokusatsu, you're going to like this book.
That special edition sounds amazing.
Yeah, if I had it within reaching distance, I could show it off, but otherwise, I've got an unlisted YouTube video I can send your way to show what I'm talking about.
Sweet.
Yeah, and for my podcasts, y'all have heard about Giant-Sized Violence, where I talk about tokusatsu-inspired comic books. So I'll have a lot of creators behind like Godzilla, Power Rangers, Massiverse books on there.
Mm-hmm.
And I also run Transcending Comics, which is the first ever trans comic book podcast. So if you're looking to dive into things that have trans representation or find some cool trans creators in the industry, check us out. We've had some pretty incredible guests and interviews so far.
Mhm.
So you'll find something for you somewhere in our podcast feed.
Right. And actually, it was because of Giant-Sized Violence that we connected. It was actually because we put an episode. I put out a Henshin Men episode out on Hokkaido the same day you put an episode out on Hokkaido, and then you invited me on to talk about, was it issue 4?
Yeah, I
Of
believe it was the
Ultra
last issue.
Yeah, because that's how your show started. It was a podcast dedicated to Ultra Mega, which lasted 4 issues and is still on hiatus.
Yeah, like you can't rush perfection, and this book is pretty damn near perfect. So, like, James Herron, take all the time you need, but we're really starting to miss the book, buddy. Please, come on.
Yeah, I was gonna say, please start putting out more issues, because Tommy needs the original subject to come back.
Yeah, we switched our title away from an Ultra Mega podcast because we've had awesome people, like, ever since Melissa Flores came on to talk about Power Rangers and Dead Lucky. I'm like, okay, we got to broaden this because there's so many other awesome creators and awesome books in this field.
Mm-hmm.
And
if any of you out there have suggestions for Toku inspired comics, or just some nicely dark tokusatsu, that's perfect for Tommy's show. I've already given some suggestions.
Yeah, and by the time this episode comes out, our next few of both podcasts will be out. We're doing a special on Neon Genesis Evangelion that's going to be kind of looking at that through a trans lens. I'm really excited about that. Just Nausicaa from TikTok is our guest, and she's like one of my favorite TikTokers. And the next episode of Giant-Sized Violence that we're recording tomorrow is our Transformers 4x40th anniversary special. Yeah, me and my old co-host Nate, we both saw the 40th anniversary theatrical event they did, re-airing the first 4 episodes of the show with a re-recording of the first episode with the original cast.
Oh, dang it, I forgot about that.
And as for the 4x40th, we're then gonna review the first 4 issues or episodes of 3 other incarnations of the show, that being the Marvel Comics, the 2007 animated series, and the most recent Skybound comics. So I know it's kind of tokusatsu adjacent at the least, but I'm sure there are Transformers fans in your audience, so check it out.
For sure. I'm one of them.
Yeah.
I would almost take any excuse to talk about Transformers on my show.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if I would call the Michael Bay movies tokusatsu, but
I mean, I might. They got giant robots, special effects, sometimes monsters. Like,
yeah, this is true.
Something doesn't have to be good to be tokusatsu.
Yeah. I just don't know how many people would get angry at me for covering it. But then again, I've covered some pretty crazy stuff on my show, so what can you do? But that all sounds really exciting. I can't wait to see what you've got coming down. I'm going to be very curious about that Evangelion episode, which is, I was telling you that before we went on the air. So yeah, that's a lot of great stuff. And if you want to learn more about me, check out my author website, nathanjsmarchand.com. And I've got a new tokusatsu podcast coming out later this summer, July 10th, which is Ultraman Day, called Henshin Power V3, picking up where both Henshin Men and Power Trip left off. And I can at least reveal this. We will be launching the show with Kamen Rider V3 because the original Henshin Men covered the original Kamen Rider. So it only makes sense that we bring, that we continue with the second ever Kamen Rider series. And if any of you have ever seen, say, like Kamen Rider The Next, you're familiar with V3 already because he was in that. All right. Well, I think that's basically everything. If anyone wants to know where, you want to plug your socials?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. I'm at Tomi Trembath. That's Tomi Trembath on Twitter and on Blue Sky. You can also find my podcasts as at Transcend Comics and at Ultra Megacast. Still got the old name. And I'm also on Instagram with Transcending Comics. So you can find us on all those. And most importantly, go to whenwetransform.com or just search it on Kickstarter. Sign up to get notified when the campaign launches this August. And yeah, we look forward to your support.
All right, right. And if you want to know where to follow MIFV anywhere, check the link trees in the show notes or listen to the credits, because you should always listen to the credits. All righty then. Oh, great. The local authorities are escalating things. What is it now? Tanks and jets. Oh, great. I hope that this mecha is durable. All right, Jimmy, cue the credits. Thank you for listening to the Monster Island Film Vault, a podcast produced and hosted by Nate Marchand. Our executive producer is Damon Noyes. If you want to be heard on the show, we'd love to hear from you, so email us at monsterislandfilmvault@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. You can also follow Jimmy from NASA on Twitter and our many colorful characters using the links in the show notes, which are on our website, monsterislandfilmvault.com. Don't forget to join our official Facebook group and Discord server, The Markalite Lounge. Our podcast logo was designed by Rebecca Hudgens. Follow her on Twitter and Instagram at super_r_illustrations. Sound effects sourced from freesound.org and created by JP Gant. Our theme song is Wanderer on the Offensive, live edit by B33J, Sarax, Juan Madrano, and Nonsensical Lexus, which is a remix of Counterattack and The Opened Way by Kawatani from Shadow of the Colossus. Additional music includes Every Country Has a Monster, performed by Jonah Ray, and Chant My Name, a cover by Second Archive of the song by Masaki Endo. All film and audio clips belong to their respective copyright holders, and no infringement is intended or implied. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and/or Podchaser to spread the word about the show. You can even support us by joining MIFV Max on Patreon. MIFV is a Moonlighting Ninjas media production and a proud member of Pod Nation. Sayonara!